Everyone ignored the poor bride, soaked and heartbroken, until a millionaire knelt and said this. "Please don't leave me here alone," Isabella whispered to the empty church doorway, her voice barely audible over the murmur of confused guests behind her. The rain hammered against the stained glass windows, as if nature itself was mourning her abandoned wedding. Isabella stood frozen at the altar, her grandmother's vintage lace dress clinging to her trembling frame. 300 guests watched in stunned silence as the minutes ticked by without any sign of Jake Thompson, her groom of 3 years. "Bella, honey, maybe he's just—" her cousin Sophia started, but Isabella cut her off with a shake of her head. "He's not coming." The words felt like glass in her throat. "I can feel it." Her father Roberto stepped forward from the front pew, his weathered hands reaching for his daughter. "Mia, let's just wait a little longer. Traffic, maybe the rain—" "No, Papa." Isabella's voice cracked. "Something's wrong. Jake wouldn't do this to me. He wouldn't." But even as she said it, doubt crept into her heart like poison. Jake had been distant lately, working late, taking calls in private. She'd pushed away her concerns, blaming wedding stress and his real estate business demands. The church coordinator approached with hesitant steps, her face pale. "Isabella, there's a message." Isabella's mother Maria gasped from the front row, her hand flying to her mouth. The coordinator held out her phone with shaking fingers. "Can't go through with it, sorry, don't look for me." "Jay." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. The phone slipped from her hands, clattering to the marble floor. 300 pairs of eyes stared at her, with a mixture of pity and shock. The flowers she'd arranged herself seemed to mock her with their perfect beauty. "Everyone out," Roberto commanded, his voice thick with barely controlled rage. "Give my daughter some space." But Isabella was already moving. She gathered her soaked skirts and ran down the aisle, past the guests, past her family's concerned faces, past the life she thought she was building. The church doors slammed behind her as she burst into the storm. The rain soaked through her dress instantly, turning the delicate lace heavy and cold against her skin. She stumbled through the empty streets of downtown Yakima, her white heels clicking against wet pavement until she couldn't run anymore. She collapsed onto a park bench across from her family's restaurant, Maria's Cocina, where her reception was supposed to be held in 2 hours. Through the windows, she could see the tables she'd decorated with sunflowers and fairy lights, the cake she'd taste-tested 3 times, the mariachi band setting up in the corner. "Why?" she sobbed to the empty park. "What did I do wrong?" Thunder rolled overhead, and Isabella wrapped her arms around herself, shivering in the summer storm. Her carefully styled hair hung in wet strands around her face, her makeup long since washed away by rain and tears. That's when she noticed the figure approaching through the downpour. A man in an expensive suit, somehow still composed despite the weather. He moved with purpose, like he'd been looking for her specifically. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice cutting through the storm. "Are you all right?" Isabella looked up through her tears, taking in the stranger's concerned face. He was tall with kind eyes and blonde hair darkened by rain. Everything about him seemed out of place in small-town Yakima. The tailored suit, the confident bearing, the way he looked at her like she mattered. "Do I look all right?" she snapped, then immediately felt ashamed. "I'm sorry, that was rude. The man approached slowly, like she might bolt if he moved too fast. "Don't apologize, you have every right to be upset." He gestured to a spot beside her on the bench. "May I?" Isabella nodded, too drained to care about propriety. The stranger sat down, maintaining a respectful distance. Up close, she could see the genuine concern in his eyes, the way he seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "I'm Daniel," he said simply, "and I think you need someone to remind you that this isn't the end of your story." "How do you know?" Isabella's voice was barely a whisper. "How do you know this isn't exactly how my story ends? Alone, soaked, abandoned by the man who promised to love me forever?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, studying her face. When he spoke, his words carried a weight that made her listen despite her pain. "Because I've seen how this story begins," he said. "This story. And women who fight this hard for love, who care this much about making perfect moments for others, don't get endings like this. They get beginnings that are even better than anything they could have planned." Something in his tone made Isabella believe him, if only for a moment. "You don't even know me." I know you ran a flower shop and event planning business out of a town of 30,000 people and still managed to make this place feel like magic, Daniel said, nodding toward the restaurant. I know you care enough about your family to have your reception at their restaurant instead of some fancy venue. I know you're strong enough to walk away from something that was hurting you, even when it meant walking away from everything you thought you wanted. Isabella stared at him. How could you possibly know all that? Daniel's expression shifted slightly, like he'd said more than he intended. Lucky guess, he said quietly. Plus, your family's restaurant has been written up in every travel magazine for the best Mexican food in Washington state. Kind of hard to miss. The explanation felt incomplete, but Isabella was too exhausted to push. Instead, she found herself studying this stranger, who'd appeared in her darkest moment like something out of a fairy tale. Why are you here? She asked. In Yakima, I mean. You don't seem like you're from around here. Business, Daniel said, which was true enough. But that's not important right now. What's important is getting you somewhere warm and dry. As if summoned by his words, Sophia appeared at the park entrance, umbrella in hand and worry written across her face. Bella, thank God we've been looking everywhere. She rushed over, taking in Isabella's soaked state and the strange man beside her. Who's this? Daniel, Isabella said, realizing she didn't even know his last name. He helped me. Sophia's protective instincts kicked in immediately. Helped how? Daniel stood smoothly, extending his hand to Sophia. I just made sure she wasn't alone out here. You must be family. You have the same eyes. Cousin, Sophia said, shaking his hand warily. Thank you for looking out for her, but we can take it from here. Of course. Daniel turned back to Isabella, pulling a simple business card from his jacket pocket. I'm staying in town for a few more days. If you need anything, someone to talk to, help with arrangements, please call. Isabella took the card with numb fingers. It was plain white with just his name and a phone number. No company logo, no fancy embossing, just Daniel Reed in simple black letters. Thank you, she whispered, meaning it more than he could know. Daniel nodded once, then walked away into the storm, leaving Isabella with more questions than answers, and the strangest feeling that her worst day might have just become something else entirely. You called him, didn't you? Sophia asked 3 days later, finding Isabella staring at Daniel's business card while nursing her third cup of coffee at Maria's cocina. Isabella looked up from the simple white card she'd been turning over in her fingers. He texted yesterday asking how I was doing. No one else has done that. Not Jake's friends, not our mutual acquaintances, just him. Bella, honey, we don't know anything about this guy. Sophia slid into the booth across from her. He could be anyone. He could be, Isabella agreed. But when everyone else was staring at me like I was a circus act, he treated me like a person. That has to count for something. The restaurant buzzed with its usual afternoon crowd, but Isabella barely noticed. For 3 days, she'd been hiding out here, helping her parents prep food and avoiding the pitying looks from townspeople who'd witnessed her public humiliation. The story had spread through Yakima like wildfire. Poor Isabella Martinez, left at the altar by Jake Thompson, who'd apparently skipped town with his secretary. Her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. How are you holding up today? Isabella found herself typing back before she could stop herself. Better. Thanks for checking. Want some company? I could use a local guide to show me around town. Sophia watched Isabella's face change as she read the message. You're smiling. That's the first time since Saturday. He wants to hang out today. Isabella felt nervous butterflies in her stomach. Is that crazy? I mean, my wedding was 3 days ago. Technically, your almost wedding was 3 days ago, Sophia corrected. There's a difference, and honestly, you deserve to smile again. 2 hours later, Isabella found herself walking through Yakima's downtown with Daniel, pointing out local landmarks and feeling almost normal for the first time in days. He'd traded his expensive suit for jeans and a button-down shirt, but he still carried himself with a confidence that made heads turn. So, this is where you grew up? Daniel asked, as they passed Isabella's old elementary school. Born and raised. My parents came here from Guadalajara when I was 2. Papa worked construction during the day and helped Mama with her catering business at night. They saved every penny to buy the restaurant space. That's incredible. Building something from nothing takes real courage. Isabella glanced at him. You sound like you know something about that. Daniel's step faltered slightly. I guess everyone's got their struggles, right? Different kinds, maybe, but struggles all the same. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, eventually ending up at Franklin Park overlooking the Yakima River. Isabella had avoided this spot since Saturday. It was where Jake had first told her he loved her 2 years ago. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said as they sat on the grass. "What made you want to plan weddings?" Isabella smiled sadly. "My parents' love story, actually. When Papa was courting Mama, he'd write her letters every day. Not emails or texts, actual handwritten letters. And he'd bring her homemade tamales because he said love should nourish the body and the soul. That's beautiful. Their wedding was tiny, just family in Mama's sister's backyard. But Mama still talks about it like it was a fairy tale because every detail came from love, not obligation or expectation." Isabella's voice caught. "I wanted to create that feeling for other people, help them build moments that would matter forever. And you're good at it," Daniel said with certainty. "How would you know?" Daniel looked out at the river. "Because 3 days ago, a woman who'd just had her heart broken still took the time to make sure the flowers in that church were perfect. Even in your worst moment, you cared about creating something beautiful." Isabella stared at him. "You were at my wedding." "I was driving past when I saw all the cars. Small-town curiosity, I guess." Daniel's explanation came easily, but something in his eyes suggested there was more to it. "I waited outside for a while, then saw you run out in the rain. So you followed me? I couldn't just leave you there alone." The simple honesty in his voice made Isabella's chest tight. "Thank you. For that day, for today, for treating me like I'm not broken." "You're not broken," Daniel said firmly. "You're healing. There's a difference." Over the next few days, Daniel became a constant presence in Isabella's life. He helped her parents during the lunch rush at Maria's Cocina, charming her mother with his willingness to wash dishes and his genuine interest in her family recipes. He accompanied Isabella on long walks through apple orchards outside town, listening as she talked through her feelings about Jake's betrayal. "I keep wondering what I missed," Isabella confessed, as they hiked through Cowich Canyon. "Were there signs? Was I so focused on planning the perfect wedding that I ignored the fact that my relationship was falling apart?" "Maybe," Daniel said. "Or maybe Jake was just a coward who couldn't face his own doubts like an adult. Not everything that goes wrong is your fault, Isabella." "Everyone calls me Bella," she said automatically. "I like Isabella better. It's stronger." She looked at him sideways. "You're different from anyone I've ever met." "Different how?" "You listen like you actually care about the answer. You ask questions that make me think, and you never try to fix me or tell me everything happens for a reason." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Maybe because I know what it's like to have people see what they want to see, instead of who you really are." Isabella wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his expression warned her off. Instead, she filed the comment away with all the other small mysteries about Daniel Reed. By Thursday, Isabella realized she'd stopped thinking about Jake for hours at a time. Daniel had a way of making her feel present, grounded in the moment, instead of drowning in regret or anxiety about the future. "I should probably start dealing with reality soon," she told him as they shared ice cream outside Miner's drive-in. "Returning wedding gifts, cancelling vendor contracts, figuring out what to do about my business." "What do you want to do about your business?" "I don't know if I can stay here," Isabella admitted. "Everyone looks at me differently now, like I'm the woman who got left at the altar instead of the woman who builds dreams for other people." "So leave." The simple suggestion startled her. "Leave? This is my home, my family is here. I'm not saying forever, but maybe a change of scenery would help you figure out what you want your life to look like now." "Where would I go?" Daniel met her eyes. "Seattle's not that far away. Lot of opportunities for someone with your skills." Something in his tone made her pulse quicken. "You live in Seattle?" "I do." Daniel looked nervous for the first time since she'd met him. "I know it's fast, and I know you're dealing with a lot right now, but if you ever wanted to visit, see what the city has to offer, I'd love to show you around." Isabella studied his face, seeing hope and uncertainty warring in his expression. A week ago, she'd been planning to spend her life with Jake Thompson in small-town Washington. Now, a stranger was offering her a glimpse of something completely different. "I'll think about it," she said finally. On Friday morning, Daniel found Isabella helping her mother prep vegetables for the lunch crowd. "I have to head back to Seattle today," he said. "Work stuff." Isabella felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. "Of course. You have a life to get back to. So do you. Daniel pulled out his wallet and handed her a simple business card, the same one she'd been carrying all week. My number's on there. Call me if you decide you want to see what else is out there. Daniel, Don't decide now, he said gently. Just promise me you won't let one coward's decision define the rest of your story. Isabella watched him walk away, feeling like she was standing at a crossroads she hadn't even known existed. In one direction lay everything familiar, her family, her hometown, the comfortable certainty of a life that had suddenly become too small for her. In the other direction lay uncertainty, possibility, and a man who'd appeared in her darkest moment like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to pray. She looked down at the business card in her hands. Just his name and number, no company logo or fancy title. Daniel Reed, the mystery man who'd spent a week helping her remember who she was beneath the wreckage of her almost marriage. You're going to call him, aren't you? Sophia asked, appearing beside her. Isabella tucked the card into her pocket. Maybe, eventually. Good, Sophia said firmly. You deserve someone who shows up. As Isabella watched Daniel's rental car disappear down Yakima Avenue, she realized Sophia was right. For the first time in 3 years, she felt like she deserved more than settling for someone who might stay. She deserved someone who would choose her every single day. The question was whether she was brave enough to find out what that might look like. I can't believe I'm actually doing this, Isabella whispered into her phone as the Greyhound bus pulled into Seattle's downtown station 2 months later. You're being brave, Mija, her mother's voice crackled through the speaker. Sometimes we have to jump before we know where we'll land. Isabella clutched her single suitcase and looked out at the towering buildings surrounding her. Seattle felt like another planet compared to Yakima, all glass and steel and endless movement. People rushed past in expensive clothes, talking on phones, moving with purpose she couldn't begin to understand. Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. See you at Pike Place Market in an hour. Can't wait to show you the city. Isabella had finally called him 3 weeks ago, after her biggest client cancelled their contract citing concerns about reliability following her wedding disaster. The rejection had stung, but it also clarified something important. She needed a fresh start somewhere people didn't know her story. Daniel had been thrilled to hear from her. Stay as long as you want, he'd said immediately. I have a guest room and there's tons of work here for someone with your skills. Now, standing in the middle of downtown Seattle with her limited savings and a head full of doubts, Isabella wondered if she'd made a huge mistake. Pike Place Market overwhelmed her senses. The smell of fresh fish and flowers, vendors calling out prices, tourists snapping photos of everything. She found Daniel waiting by the flower stalls, looking perfectly at home in the chaos. You made it, he said, pulling her into a hug that felt both familiar and thrilling. How was the bus ride? Long, but worth it, I think. Isabella looked around at the organized mayhem. This place is incredible. Wait until you see the rest. Daniel took her bag and led her through the market, pointing out vendors and sharing stories about the market's history. He seemed to know everyone. The flower seller who gave Isabella a free bouquet, the coffee roaster who insisted they try a new blend, the fishmonger who performed an elaborate throwing routine just for them. You're like the mayor of this place, Isabella laughed as they walked toward the waterfront. I just appreciate good people doing good work, Daniel said. Plus, I eat lunch here most days, gets me out of the office. What kind of work do you do exactly? You've been pretty vague about the whole tech thing. Daniel's step faltered slightly. Software development. Pretty boring stuff, really. What about you? Any thoughts on what kind of events you might want to plan here? The subject change felt deliberate, but Isabella let it slide. She was still figuring out who Daniel Reed was beyond the man who'd rescued her from her worst day. Daniel's apartment surprised her. It was nice, but not extravagant. A one-bedroom place in Capitol Hill with exposed brick walls and a view of the Space Needle. Nothing screamed wealth or success, just comfortable urban living. The guest room's small, but it's yours for as long as you need it, Daniel said, showing her a cozy space with a twin bed and a desk by the window. This is perfect. Thank you. Isabella set down her suitcase, feeling suddenly nervous about the intimacy of staying in his space. I'll start looking for my own place right away. No rush. I travel for work pretty often anyway. Over the next few weeks, Isabella began to find her footing in Seattle. Daniel introduced her to the city slowly, neighborhood cafes, local markets, hidden parks with stunning views. He seemed to know exactly how much stimulation she could handle before becoming overwhelmed. "You're a good tour guide," Isabella told him one evening as they shared Thai food in Fremont. "Very patient with small-town refugees." "I like seeing the city through your eyes," Daniel said. "Makes me remember why I moved here in the first place." "Where are you from originally?" "All over, really. My family moved around a lot when I was young." Daniel's answer came easily, but Isabella sensed there were pieces missing. "What about you? Ever think about leaving Yakima before all this?" "Sometimes. But my family's business was there. My whole life was there. It felt selfish to want more." "Wanting more isn't selfish, Isabella. It's human. It's—" The way he said her name still sent shivers down her spine. Jake had always called her Bella, like everyone else, but Daniel insisted on her full name, like it was something precious. 3 weeks into her stay, Daniel mentioned that his small tech company was planning a dinner event for investors and potential clients. "It's nothing fancy, just dinner and some presentations. But we could use help with the coordination if you're interested." Isabella jumped at the chance to work again. "Absolutely. What's your budget?" "Whatever you think it needs." "I trust your judgment." The faith in his voice warmed her. Jake had always questioned her decisions, second-guessed her vendor choices, complained about costs. Daniel simply trusted her to create something beautiful. The event planning consumed Isabella's attention for the next 2 weeks. Daniel's small tech company apparently had bigger budgets than she'd expected, allowing her to book a stunning venue overlooking Elliott Bay and hire top-tier caterers. She threw herself into the work, grateful to feel useful and creative again. The night of the event, Isabella wore her best black dress and watched from the sidelines as Daniel's colleagues and clients mingled over cocktails. She'd created exactly the atmosphere she'd envisioned. Elegant but approachable, impressive without being intimidating. "This is incredible," a woman in an expensive suit told her. "The flowers, the lighting, the food, everything flows perfectly. You should be planning corporate events full-time." "Thank you. I'm actually just getting started in Seattle." "Well, here's my card. We host quarterly investor dinners and could use someone with your eye for detail." Isabella accepted the business card, reading the woman's title, Senior Vice President, Cascade Ventures. This was apparently a bigger deal than Daniel had let on. "Isabella, there's someone I want you to meet." Daniel appeared beside her, guiding her toward a distinguished older man in a perfectly tailored suit. "This is the genius behind tonight's perfection," Daniel told the man. "Isabella Martinez, meet Robert Chen from Pacific Northwest Partners." "Ms. Martinez, exceptional work tonight. Daniel mentioned you're new to the Seattle market?" Robert Chen's handshake was firm, his attention focused entirely on her. "Very new. I moved here from Eastern Washington about a month ago. Well, you clearly understand how to create the right atmosphere for business. I'll be in touch about future opportunities." As the evening wound down, Isabella found herself holding 6 business cards from people eager to hire her services. The response was overwhelming and exciting, but also confusing. "Daniel, who exactly were those people?" she asked as they cleaned up after the last guest left. "Investors, mostly. Some clients, some potential partners." Daniel's answer was casual, but something in his expression seemed guarded. "They all seemed pretty high level for a small software company. Seattle's tech scene is pretty connected. Everyone knows everyone." The explanation felt incomplete, but Isabella was too tired and too grateful to push. Daniel had given her a chance to rebuild her career when she'd needed it most. Whatever connections he had in the business world, she was lucky to benefit from them. Walking back to Daniel's apartment that night, Isabella felt hopeful for the first time since her wedding disaster. Seattle was full of possibilities, her skills were in demand, and she was falling for a man who seemed to genuinely care about her happiness. "Thank you," she told Daniel as they reached his building. "For tonight, for everything, I feel like myself again." Daniel stopped walking and turned to face her. "You were always yourself, Isabella. You just needed the right place to shine." When he kissed her under the streetlight, Isabella felt something she'd never experienced with Jake, a sense of coming home to herself while simultaneously stepping into something completely new. Seattle sparkled around them like a promise of better things ahead, and for the first time in months, Isabella believed in happy endings again. What she didn't know was that the man kissing her was worth more than most small countries, that the small tech company employed over 5,000 people, and that tomorrow morning his face would be on the front page of the Seattle Times business section as one of the Pacific Northwest's most eligible bachelors. But ignorance for the moment felt exactly like bliss. "I'll just drop these files off at your apartment and head home," Isabella said into her phone as she climbed the stairs to Daniel's building 6 weeks later. "I forgot to give you the final vendor contracts from the Morrison wedding. Actually, I'm running late for a meeting." Daniel's voice sounded strained through the speaker. "Just leave them with my neighbor if I'm not there. Apartment 4B. Isabella frowned at his rushed tone but shrugged it off. Daniel had been working longer hours lately, often taking calls in another room and seeming distracted during their conversations. She'd attributed it to normal work stress, but a nagging voice in her head wondered if he was getting tired of her constant presence in his space. She knocked on the door of apartment 4B, expecting to meet Daniel for the first time. Instead, a young man in a Cloud Tech Solutions t-shirt answered, looking confused. "Can I help you? I'm looking for Daniel Reed. I need to drop off some files." The man's confusion deepened. "Daniel Reed? You mean like the CEO of Cloud Tech? Why would he be here?" Isabella's stomach dropped. "CEO? No, you must be thinking of someone else. Daniel works in software development. Lady, there's only one Daniel Reed in Seattle Tech, and he's worth about $12 billion. Definitely not living in my one-bedroom apartment." The man gestured around the modest space behind him. "Who are you exactly?" I'm his girlfriend," Isabella stammered, the words feeling foreign and uncertain in her mouth. The man's eyes widened with recognition. "Oh, shit. You're the girl from the newspaper photos, the one he's been seeing." He pulled out his phone and showed her a grainy paparazzi shot of her and Daniel walking through Pike Place Market. "This is you, right?" Isabella stared at the image, her world tilting sideways. "What newspaper? What photos?" Seattle Business Journal ran a whole piece about Daniel Reed's mysterious new girlfriend. "They've been trying to figure out who you are for weeks." The man looked at her with growing sympathy. "You really don't know who he is, do you?" Isabella felt like she might throw up. "Where does he actually live?" "Penthouse in Belltown, the whole top floor of the Meridian Tower." The man's voice was gentle now, like he was breaking bad news to a child. "I'm sorry, I thought you knew." Isabella's hands shook as she pulled out her phone and Googled Daniel Reed Seattle. The results flooded her screen. Forbes articles, business profiles, society page photos of him at charity galas in expensive tuxedos. Daniel Reed, founder and CEO of Cloud Tech Solutions, estimated net worth $12.3 billion, one of Seattle's most eligible bachelors. The man whose small tech company had hosted that investor dinner. The man who'd been living a lie for 2 months while she fell in love with him. "Can you tell me how to get to the Meridian Tower?" Isabella asked, her voice eerily calm. 20 minutes later, Isabella stood in front of a gleaming 40-story building in Belltown, staring up at the penthouse level where Daniel apparently actually lived. The doorman tried to stop her, but she pushed past with the desperate energy of someone whose entire reality had just shattered. The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless. Isabella's mind raced through every conversation, every moment, every carefully constructed lie. Daniel's vague answers about work, his mysterious knowledge of high-end vendors and venues, the way expensive restaurant owners and exclusive venue managers had bent over backward to accommodate his requests. The elevator opened directly into a stunning penthouse that probably cost more than her entire hometown. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Seattle, Puget Sound and the Olympic Mountains beyond. The space was elegant and modern, filled with art that probably belonged in museums. "Isabella?" Daniel emerged from what looked like a home office, his face going pale when he saw her expression. "What are you doing here? How did you—" $12 billion, Isabella said quietly. Daniel closed his eyes. "You found out." "Found out?" Isabella's voice rose. "Found out that the man I've been sleeping with, the man I thought I was falling in love with, has been lying to me about literally everything for 2 months. I never lied about my feelings for you. Everything else, though. Your job, your life, where you live, who you are, all lies." Isabella walked to the massive windows, looking out at a view that probably cost more per month than most people made in a year. "Was any of it real, Daniel? Or was I just some amusing small-town project for a bored billionaire? It was real, Daniel said desperately. Everything between us was real. You just what? Thought it would be fun to play dress-up and pretend to be a normal person? See how long you could fool the pathetic woman who got left at the altar. That's not... How long were you planning to keep this up? Isabella spun around to face him, tears streaming down her face. Were you ever going to tell me the truth? Or were you just going to keep me as your little secret forever? Daniel ran his hands through his hair, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. I wanted to tell you. Every day I wanted to tell you, but I was scared you'd look at me differently. You mean I'd look at you honestly? I mean you'd wonder if I actually cared about you, or if you were just another pretty face who wanted something from me. Daniel's voice cracked. Do you have any idea how many people have pretended to love me for my money? How many relationships I've had that fell apart the moment my net worth became part of the equation? So you decided to lie instead? I decided to let you know me first. The real me without all the complications that come with wealth. Isabella laughed bitterly. The real you? Daniel, I don't even know your real name at this point. I don't know anything about you that isn't carefully constructed fiction. My name is Daniel Reed. I'm 32 years old. I founded Cloud Tech 8 years ago in my garage. I hate fancy restaurants but love hole-in-the-wall taco places. I read mystery novels when I can't sleep. I've been in love exactly once in my life, and it's with you. Stop. Isabella held up her hand. Just stop. You don't get to make pretty speeches about love when you've been manipulating me for months. I wasn't manipulating you. What would you call it? You created an entire fake persona to trick me into trusting you. You made me feel crazy for noticing that things didn't add up. You let me stay in that apartment, thinking it was yours, while you were living here like some kind of tech royalty. Daniel looked stricken. The apartment belongs to one of my employees, Marcus, my assistant. I asked him to let me stay there sometimes so I could have a normal place to bring you. Your assistant. Isabella felt sick. How many people knew about your little social experiment? How many people were laughing at the stupid small-town girl who actually believed Daniel Reed? Gave a damn about her? Nobody was laughing. Marcus was the only one who knew, and he thought I was making a mistake by not being honest with you from the beginning. He was right. Isabella walked toward the elevator, needing to get out before she completely fell apart. Daniel followed her, panic in his voice. Isabella, please. Don't leave like this. Let me explain. Explain what? How you decided I wasn't worth the truth. How you thought I was so shallow that I'd only care about your money. Isabella jabbed the elevator button repeatedly. Or maybe you want to explain how you were at my wedding that day. Because normal people don't just happen to drive by small-town churches, Daniel. What were you really doing in Yakima? Daniel's face went white. Isabella, tell me the truth. For once in this entire relationship, tell me the actual truth. The elevator arrived and Isabella stepped inside. Daniel put his hand on the door to stop it from closing. I saw Jake leaving town with another woman that morning, he said quietly. I was in Yakima looking at a potential site for a community center. I saw him loading suitcases into his car with some blonde woman, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. I tried to get to the church in time to warn you, but I was too late. Isabella stared at him in shock. You knew. You knew he'd already left me, and you didn't say anything. What good would it have done? It would have just hurt you more. So you let me blame myself. Let me wonder what I did wrong, what I could have done differently. Isabella's voice was barely a whisper. You watched me torture myself with guilt, when you could have told me it had nothing to do with me. I was trying to protect you. No, you were trying to control the situation, just like you've been controlling everything since the day we met. Isabella stepped back into the elevator. I don't know who you are, Daniel, but I know I can't trust you. The elevator doors closed on Daniel's stricken face, and Isabella collapsed against the back wall as the car descended. 2 months of her life, 2 months of falling in love, 2 months of believing she'd found someone honest and real, all built on lies. As the elevator reached the ground floor, Isabella realized she had nowhere to go. Her apartment in Yakima was sublet, her savings account was nearly empty, and the man she'd trusted with her heart and her future had turned out to be a stranger. She walked out into the Seattle evening, rain beginning to fall like tears from the sky, and for the second time in 4 months, Isabella Martinez found herself alone and heartbroken in a world that suddenly felt too big and too cold to bear. "Mija, you're home," Maria Martinez said 6 hours later, wrapping Isabella in her arms at the Yakima bus station. "Sofia called and told us you were coming back." Isabella melted into her mother's embrace, feeling like a child again. "I made such a fool of myself, Mama. How could I be so stupid?" "Love makes fools of us all sometimes," Roberto said gently, taking Isabella's suitcase. "The important thing is that you're safe." The drive back to her childhood home felt like traveling backward through time. Everything looked smaller than she remembered, more contained and predictable. After 2 months in Seattle's urban sprawl, Yakima felt like a miniature version of itself. "Do you want to talk about it?" Sofia asked that night as they sat on the porch swing where they'd spent countless summer evenings as teenagers. "He's worth $12 billion, Isabella said flatly. $12 billion, Sofia. And he let me think he was just some regular guy who worked in tech. Holy shit. He knew Jake had left me, saw him driving out of town with another woman that morning and didn't tell me." Isabella's voice cracked. "I spent months blaming myself, wondering what I did wrong, and he knew the whole time that Jake was just a coward who ran away with his secretary." Sofia was quiet for a long moment. "That's really messed up. The worst part is that I think I was falling in love with him. Not the billionaire version. I didn't even know that existed. I was falling for Daniel, the software developer who washed dishes at Mama's restaurant and listened to me ramble about wedding flowers. Maybe that person was real too." Isabella shook her head. "How can I tell what was real when everything was built on lies?" Over the next few weeks, Isabella threw herself into rebuilding her life in Yakima. She moved back into her old apartment, rekindled relationships with local vendors, and slowly began taking on small events again. The work felt different now, less passionate, more mechanical, but it paid the bills and kept her hands busy. Daniel called 17 times in the first 3 days. Isabella ignored every call. He sent flowers with handwritten notes that she threw away without reading. When a delivery truck arrived with an enormous fruit basket, Isabella donated it to the senior center without opening the card. "You're punishing yourself as much as him," Sofia observed one evening, as Isabella methodically deleted another voicemail without listening to it. "I'm protecting myself." "Are you? Or are you so scared of being hurt again that you won't even consider the possibility that his feelings were genuine?" Isabella looked up from her laptop where she was pricing linens for her anniversary party. "His feelings? Sofia, the man lied to me about everything, his job, his home, his entire identity. What part of that suggests genuine feelings? The part where he spent a week in Yakima taking care of you when he could have been anywhere else in the world. The part where he helped Mama and Papa at the restaurant without being asked. The part where he's apparently been calling you every day for 3 weeks even though you won't talk to him. Money doesn't make someone a good person. No, but it doesn't automatically make them a bad person either." Isabella wanted to argue, but something Sofia said nagged at her. Over the following days, she found herself paying attention to strange coincidences around town. The community center that had been struggling for funding suddenly received an anonymous donation large enough to complete their expansion. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose husband needed expensive heart surgery, found that someone had mysteriously paid their medical bills. The food bank received a check for $50,000 from a donor who wished to remain unnamed. "Papa, who's been making all these donations around town?" Isabella asked one evening as she helped close the restaurant. Roberto looked uncomfortable. "Nobody knows. Someone with deep pockets who cares about the community, I guess." "But you have an idea who it might be?" Her father sighed. "Your Daniel called me 2 weeks ago, asked about local organizations that could use support. I told him it wasn't necessary, that you wouldn't want his charity." "What did he say?" "He said it wasn't charity. Said he'd fallen in love with this town and the people in it, and love should leave things better than it found them." Isabella felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. "Papa, I didn't give him any information, but somehow these donations started showing up anyway." Roberto met his daughter's eyes. "Maybe he really did care about more than just you, Mija. Maybe he cared about the things that matter to you." That night, Isabella finally listened to one of Daniel's voicemails. His voice sounded tired and strained. "Isabella, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know that every moment we shared was real for me. I know I handled everything wrong. I know I should have told you the truth from the beginning, But I've never met anyone who saw me the way you did. Not as a bank account or a business opportunity, just as a person worth knowing. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to trust you with the whole truth. You deserved better from me." Isabella played the message 3 times before deleting it. A month after leaving Seattle, Isabella was coordinating a small wedding at the same church where her own disaster had occurred. The irony wasn't lost on her, as she arranged flowers and directed vendors in the space where her life had fallen apart twice now. Isabella Martinez. A woman in an expensive suit approached her during the reception setup. "I'm Jennifer Walsh from Pacific Northwest Partners. We met at a dinner event in Seattle a few months ago." Isabella remembered her, one of the investors from Daniel's fake company event. "Ms. Walsh, what brings you to Yakima?" "You, actually. I've been trying to reach you through your Seattle contacts, but nobody seemed to know how to find you." Jennifer smiled. "I have a proposition. We're planning a series of corporate retreats in Eastern Washington, and we need someone who understands both urban sophistication and rural charm. Your work at that investor dinner was exactly what we're looking for." The offer was generous, more money than Isabella had made in 6 months, with the potential for ongoing work. But it would mean regular trips to Seattle, possibly encountering Daniel's world again. "I'll need some time to think about it," Isabella said. "Of course. But Isabella, don't let personal complications keep you from professional opportunities. You're too talented for that." As Jennifer drove away, Isabella realized she'd been hiding in Yakima not just from Daniel, but from the version of herself that had thrived in Seattle. The woman who'd confidently planned high-end events, who'd networked with business leaders, who'd believed she deserved more than small-town limitations. That evening, Isabella found herself walking past the park bench where Daniel had first sat beside her. The memory was still painful, but for the first time she tried to see it from his perspective. A wealthy man who'd probably never experienced genuine connection without the complication of his fortune. Someone who'd found a woman in crisis and wanted to help without the power dynamic that money would create. His methods had been wrong, his deception inexcusable, but maybe his motives had been more complicated than simple manipulation. Isabella pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Marcus, Daniel's assistant, who'd given her his number during her Seattle stay. "Isabella?" Marcus sounded surprised. "How are you doing?" "I'm okay. Marcus, can I ask you something? Those donations showing up around Yakima, that's Daniel, isn't it?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I can't really discuss his personal business. He's not your boss right now. Just person to person. Is he trying to buy his way back into my life?" "Honestly, I don't think he expects to get back into your life. He's just trying to take care of the place that took care of you when you needed it most." Marcus paused. "He's been pretty messed up since you left, Isabella. I've never seen him like this." "Good," Isabella said, then immediately felt ashamed of her pettiness. "Look, I'm not trying to get in the middle of whatever happened between you two, but Daniel's not the same guy who used to date socialites and show up in gossip columns. Something changed in him after he met you, something real. After hanging up, Isabella sat on the park bench and tried to imagine a different version of that first meeting. What if Daniel had introduced himself honestly? "Hi, I'm a billionaire, but I'd like to comfort you in your moment of devastation." Would she have trusted him? Would she have seen his kindness as genuine, or as the entitled gesture of someone accustomed to fixing problems with money? The honest answer was that she probably would have run away immediately, too intimidated and suspicious to let him help her heal. Maybe Daniel had been wrong to lie, but maybe he'd also been right that the truth would have prevented them from finding each other at all. For the first time in 6 weeks, Isabella began to consider the possibility that love might be more complicated than simple honesty, and that sometimes the worst mistakes came from the deepest fears rather than the cruelest intentions. But considering forgiveness and actually offering it were 2 very different things, and Isabella wasn't sure she was brave enough to risk her heart on Daniel Reed again. "You're going back to Seattle, aren't you?" Sophia asked 6 months later, as Isabella packed her portfolio case for another corporate retreat planning meeting. Isabella looked up from her laptop where she'd been reviewing venue contracts. "It's just work, Sophia. Jennifer's company has been great to collaborate with. Bella, you've taken 5 Seattle jobs in the past 2 months. At some point, you're going to have to admit you miss it there." "I miss the work opportunities," Isabella said carefully. "Seattle has a bigger market for what I do. Sophia sat on Isabella's bed, watching her cousin fold business suits that hadn't seen daylight during her first stint in Yakima. "Have you heard anything about him?" "Daniel?" Isabella's hand stilled on a navy blazer. "Marcus texts sometimes, updates about the foundation work." "The foundation?" "Daniel created some non-profit that's been funding community projects around here, the Isabella Martinez Foundation." Saying the name still made her chest tight. "Apparently it's expanded to other rural communities across Washington and Oregon. He named a foundation after you. Stupid, right? Like I'm some dead philanthropist instead of a living person he could just call." But even as Isabella dismissed it, she knew the foundation meant something more complicated than a grand gesture. Over the past 6 months, she'd watched it fund 12 small businesses, sponsor 2 community college scholarship programs, and support a rural healthcare initiative that was already making a difference in people's lives. "Maybe it's not about you," Sophia said gently. "Maybe it's about the things you care about." Isabella's phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Walsh. "Change of plans for tomorrow's meeting. New venue, small church in Yakima. Client specifically requested it for authenticity. Address attached." Isabella stared at the message, her stomach dropping as she recognized the address. The same church where Jake had left her at the altar, where her story with Daniel had really begun. "Everything okay?" Sophia asked. "Just work drama," Isabella lied, already dreading whatever elaborate setup was waiting for her. The next morning, Isabella arrived at the church to find it transformed. White flowers covered every surface, candles flickered along the windowsills, and soft music played from hidden speakers. It looked like a wedding venue, which made no sense for a corporate retreat planning meeting. "Hello, Isabella." She turned to find Daniel standing at the altar, wearing a simple dark suit and looking nervous in a way she'd never seen before. His hair was shorter than she remembered, and there were circles under his eyes that suggested he'd been sleeping as poorly as she had. "What is this?" Isabella's voice echoed in the empty church. "A mistake, probably," Daniel said quietly. "But I needed to see you, and you won't return my calls. So you tricked me into coming here? I paid Jennifer's company to book you for an event that doesn't exist, yes. If that's tricking you, then I'm guilty." Daniel took a step closer, then stopped when Isabella backed away. "There really is a couple getting married next week, though. Rebecca and Michael Chen. They met at that investor dinner you planned. They asked me to help arrange their wedding, and they specifically wanted you to coordinate it." Isabella looked around at the beautiful setup. "This is their wedding. Part of it. But mostly it's me trying to show you something I should have shown you 6 months ago." "Which is?" Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folder, instead of the ring box Isabella had been dreading. "These are the incorporation papers for the Isabella Martinez Foundation. Your name isn't just on it as a tribute. It's on there because I want you to run it." Isabella stared at the documents. "I don't understand. I've been doing this all wrong, trying to help your community from a distance, making decisions about what people need without actually asking them. The foundation needs someone who understands these communities from the inside, someone who knows the difference between charity and investment." "Daniel, I'm not asking you to forgive me," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "I'm not even asking you to trust me again, though I hope someday you might. I'm asking you to take this job because you're the right person for it, and because these communities deserve someone who will fight for them the way you fought for your own dreams." Isabella flipped through the paperwork, seeing organizational charts, budget allocations, and program descriptions that represented millions of dollars in rural development funding. "Why would you do this?" "Because I fell in love with more than just you that week in Yakima. I fell in love with your family's story, with the way small communities take care of each other, with the idea that success should lift up the people around you instead of separating you from them." Daniel walked closer, and this time Isabella didn't back away. "I know I handled everything wrong. I know I should have trusted you with the truth from the beginning, but Isabella, every feeling I had for you was real. Every moment we shared was real. The only thing that was fake was my address and my job title. Those aren't small things, Daniel. No, they're not. And I'm not asking you to pretend they don't matter." Daniel's eyes searched her face. "I'm asking you to consider the possibility that people can make terrible mistakes for reasons that aren't entirely terrible." Isabella set the folder down on a nearby pew. "I've spent 6 months trying to hate you. Any luck with that?" "Some days," Isabella's voice caught. Other days I miss talking to you so much I can barely function. I'll see something funny and reach for my phone to text you, then remember that I don't actually know who you are. You know who I am, Daniel said softly. You know I read mystery novels when I can't sleep. You know I'm terrible at cooking but great at doing dishes. You know I think your laugh is the best sound in the world, and that I'd rather spend an evening talking to you than attend any fancy event my money could buy. I also know you're capable of elaborate deceptions when it suits you. Daniel nodded slowly. That's fair. And if you decide you can't trust me again, I'll understand. But Isabella, I need you to know that lying to you was the hardest thing I've ever done, and losing you was the worst consequence I've ever faced. Isabella looked around the church, remembering her last conversation with Daniel in this space. How different would her life have been if he'd been honest from the beginning? Would she have been brave enough to let a billionaire help her heal? Would she have been able to see past his wealth to the man underneath? The foundation, she said finally. This is really what you want? Me running a non-profit with your money? I want you to run a non-profit that happens to use my money as startup capital. Big difference. Daniel's mouth quirked in the first almost smile she'd seen from him. Plus, non-profit directors have to file public reports. Very hard to maintain secret identities in that job. Despite everything, Isabella felt her lips twitch. You've thought this through. I've had 6 months to think about how to prove that I learned something from my mistakes. Isabella picked up the folder again, scanning the scope of work described in the documents. Rural business development, educational scholarships, healthcare access, community infrastructure, all the things that mattered to places like Yakima, all the things that could make a real difference in people's lives. This is a lot of responsibility, she said. You handled million-dollar corporate events in your sleep. I think you can manage. Those were parties, Daniel. This is people's lives. Which is exactly why it should be you. Daniel's voice was steady now, confident in a way that reminded her why she'd fallen for him in the first place. Isabella, you know these communities. You understand what it means to build something from nothing, to fight for your dreams in places where people think small is all you can achieve. The foundation needs someone who won't just write checks. It needs someone who will show up. Isabella thought about Mrs. Rodriguez, whose medical bills had been mysteriously paid. About the community center that now had after-school programs for kids who used to have nowhere safe to go. About the dozen small businesses that had been able to expand or improve because someone had invested in their potential. If I did this, she said slowly, I'd want full operational control. No interference from billionaire benefactors who think they know better. Done. And I'd want to split my time between Seattle and Eastern Washington. The foundation can't be run from an ivory tower. Whatever you think is best. And Daniel? Isabella met his eyes directly. If we're going to work together, if we're going to try to figure out what's left between us, it has to be completely honest this time. No more secrets, no more managing information to protect my feelings. Daniel's smile was tentative, but real. I can do honest. Fair warning, though, I'm going to tell you I love you. A lot. That might get annoying. Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. Just so we're clear, I'm not forgiving you because of the foundation. I'm considering forgiving you because I think maybe we both learned something about what love actually requires. What's that? Courage, Isabella said simply. The courage to be completely known by someone even when it's terrifying. Daniel took another step closer. So what happens now? Isabella looked around the church one more time, seeing it not as the place where her dreams had been shattered, but as the place where they'd been rebuilt into something stronger and more real. Now you ask me again, she said quietly. Daniel's eyebrows rose. Ask you what? The question you should have asked 6 months ago when you actually knew who I was asking it to. Understanding dawned in Daniel's eyes. He dropped to one knee right there in the aisle, pulling out a simple silver ring that looked nothing like the elaborate diamond Jake had chosen. Isabella Martinez, he said, his voice shaking slightly. Will you marry me? Not my money, not my reputation, not my connections, just me. The man who fell in love with your courage and your kindness and your ability to create beauty from chaos. Isabella looked down at him, this powerful man, humbling himself in the place where her story had broken apart and begun again. 6 months ago, she would have seen this moment as the fairy tale ending she'd always dreamed of. Now she understood it was something better. A beginning built on truth instead of fantasy. "Ask me again in a year," she said, extending her hand to help him up. "After we've worked together. After you've proven you can handle me knowing exactly how much you're worth. After I've figured out if I can love a billionaire without losing myself." Daniel took her hand and stood, slipping the ring onto her finger anyway. "So this is a promise ring? This is a, let's see if we can build something real ring." "I can work with that," Daniel said, and when he kissed her, Isabella tasted possibility and hope and the complicated sweetness of love that had survived its own destruction. Outside, rain began to fall on the church windows, but inside, two people who had learned the hard way that the best love stories aren't the easiest ones held each other and prepared to find out what came after happily ever after. 2 years had passed since Daniel knelt in that small Yakima church and asked Isabella to take a chance on building something real together. Now, standing in the exact same spot where her fairy tale had once crumbled, Isabella felt the weight of how much had changed. The church was packed with 300 guests, not the pitying audience of her first wedding attempt, but a celebration of friends, family, and community members whose lives had been touched by the Isabella Martinez Foundation. Mrs. Rodriguez sat in the third row, her husband healthy and smiling beside her. The owner of the expanded community center waved from the back. Young scholarship recipients filled an entire section, beaming in their Sunday best. "You ready, mija?" Roberto asked, offering Isabella his arm at the back of the church. Isabella looked down at her dress. Not her grandmother's vintage gown this time, but something entirely new that reflected who she'd become. Simple, elegant, chosen by a woman who knew exactly what she wanted and wasn't afraid to ask for it. "I'm ready, Papa." The music began, and Isabella walked down the aisle toward Daniel, who stood waiting in a simple black suit with tears already streaming down his face. Beside him, Marcus held the rings with a grin that suggested he'd been waiting 2 years for this moment. Sophia stood as Isabella's maid of honor, having declared that anyone who made her cousin this happy deserved a second chance. But it was Daniel's expression that made Isabella's heart soar. No hiding, no careful management of truth or image, just pure joy at seeing the woman he loved walking toward their future together. "Hi," Isabella whispered when she reached the altar. "Hi yourself," Daniel whispered back. "You look incredible. You clean up pretty well for a billionaire." Daniel laughed, the sound echoing through the church. Even at their wedding, they couldn't resist teasing each other about the journey that had brought them here. The ceremony was everything Isabella's first wedding hadn't been: authentic, joyful, and rooted in deep knowledge of who they were choosing to love. When Daniel spoke his vows, his voice carried the weight of someone who had learned what it meant to nearly lose everything that mattered. "Isabella, I promise to trust you with my whole truth, even when it scares me. I promise to show up for you, for your dreams, and for the communities we serve together. I promise to love you not because you're perfect, but because you're perfectly yourself, strong enough to forgive me, brave enough to build something new, and stubborn enough to make me work for every day of happiness we share." Isabella's own vows came from a place of hard-won wisdom. "Daniel, I promise to see you as you are, not as your bank account or your reputation or your mistakes. I promise to build our partnership on truth instead of fantasy, on shared values instead of shared illusions. And I promise to love you not despite your complexity, but because of it. Because the man who makes terrible mistakes for good reasons is also the man who'll spend his life trying to make things right." When they kissed as husband and wife, the church erupted in celebration that could probably be heard 3 blocks away. Isabella had never felt more herself than in that moment. Successful non-profit director, beloved community member, woman who'd learned to trust her own worth enough to demand honesty from the people she loved. The reception at Maria's Cocina overflowed with the warmth of genuine community. Isabella's parents danced to the same song from their own wedding 40 years earlier, while Daniel's business associates mingled easily with Yakima locals and foundation beneficiaries. The mariachi band played songs that had everyone on their feet, and the cake, made by the same baker who'd created Isabella's first wedding cake, tasted like redemption and new beginnings. "So how does it feel to be married to a billionaire?" Sophia asked during a quiet moment between dances. Isabella looked across the restaurant to where Daniel was deep in conversation with 3 teenagers who'd received foundation scholarships. His face was animated as he listened to their college plans, and Isabella could see him quietly making mental notes about ways the foundation might support their goals. "Honestly, most days I forget about the money," Isabella said. "I'm too busy being married to the man who remembers every person's name at foundation events, who still does dishes when we eat here, and who cries during romantic comedies but tries to hide it. That's disgustingly healthy." "It took work to get here," Isabella said seriously. "The first year was hard, Sophia. Learning to trust him again, figuring out how to be myself in his world, dealing with the media attention when our relationship went public. Some days I wondered if we were forcing something that wasn't meant to work. What changed?" Isabella watched Daniel excuse himself from the teenagers and start walking toward her, his face lighting up when their eyes met. "I realized that perfect love isn't about never having problems. It's about choosing each other every day, especially when it's difficult." The foundation had exceeded all expectations in its 2 years of operation. Isabella split her time between Seattle and rural Washington, overseeing programs that had helped launch 37 small businesses, funded 2 rural healthcare clinics, and provided college scholarships to over 100 students. She'd testified before state legislature committees, been featured on the cover of Nonprofit Quarterly, and discovered that her small-town perspective was exactly what large-scale philanthropy needed. More importantly, she'd learned that loving someone wealthy didn't mean losing herself. It meant being strong enough to maintain her own identity while building something larger together. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Reed?" Daniel asked, extending his hand. "I kept my name, remember?" Isabella teased, taking his hand anyway. "May I have this dance, Ms. Martinez, director of the Isabella Martinez Foundation and love of my life?" "Better." As they swayed to a slow song, Isabella caught sight of a young woman in a wedding dress at a corner table, one of the scholarship recipients, glowing with happiness as she showed off her engagement ring to friends. "See her?" Isabella nodded toward the young woman. "Maria Gonzalez, first in her family to graduate from college thanks to the foundation, getting married next month to her high school sweetheart. Are you planning their wedding?" "Of course, pro bono, through the foundation's Community Celebration Fund." Daniel spun Isabella around the makeshift dance floor, both of them laughing as flower petals fell from the ceiling decorations. The moment felt suspended in time, perfect not because nothing had gone wrong, but because everything that had gone wrong had led them exactly where they needed to be. "Any regrets?" Daniel asked as the song wound down. Isabella considered the question seriously. "About Jake leaving me? No, about you lying to me. Yes, but not because it happened, because we both had to learn the hard way how to be honest with each other." "What about leaving Yakima the first time?" "That wasn't leaving. That was growing." Isabella looked around the restaurant filled with people celebrating their love. "This is home, Daniel, but home isn't a place you never leave. It's a place you can always come back to." As the evening wound down, Isabella and Daniel prepared to leave for their honeymoon. 2 weeks in Spain, chosen because Isabella had always wanted to see the places her grandmother had told stories about. But unlike fairy tale endings, their departure wasn't an escape from reality, but a brief pause before returning to the work and community and complicated, beautiful life they'd built together. Roberto's old pickup truck, decorated with tin cans and flowers by Sophia and the mariachi band, waited outside the restaurant. Daniel had suggested a limousine, but Isabella had insisted on the truck, a perfect symbol of how their love had transformed ordinary moments into something extraordinary. "Ready to start the rest of our lives, Mrs. Reed, who kept her name?" Daniel asked as they climbed into the truck. "Ready to continue the rest of our lives," Isabella corrected. "This isn't where our story starts, Daniel. It's just where we stopped being afraid of how it might end." As they drove away from the celebration, tin cans rattling behind them and laughter following them into the night, Isabella reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives are doorways to the best ones. Sometimes the people who hurt us aren't trying to hurt us. Sometimes love means learning to forgive not just others' mistakes, but our own fear of being completely known. The road ahead stretched out under a canopy of stars, leading toward a future neither of them could have planned, but both of them had chosen. In the rearview mirror, the lights of Yakima grew smaller, but never disappeared entirely. Because home, Isabella had learned, wasn't something you left behind. It was something you carried with you, something that made you brave enough to build new dreams while honoring the ones that had shaped you. And as Daniel reached over to take her hand, their wedding rings catching the moonlight, Isabella knew that some stories don't end with happily ever after. The best ones begin there.